Hey y'all, how we doing today? I hope we slept well last night and weren't kept up by the acute awareness of our impending doom. I know I slept like a baby, but that's because I was born in 2001 and I have never once in my life had to go to sleep without that acute awareness. Um, I'm here today to represent my generation, which is a generation that has been conditioned by exploitative, profit driven technologies into expecting that there is nothing else out there. A generation that is anxious, lonely, isolated, and in desperate search for some form of community. And at the same time, overly accepting of technology and not critical of the way that we adopt technology, and therefore willing to accept technology as a solution to the loneliness that they're feeling. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what that solution is. So just to level set, I want to ask Meetali here, can you share with us, we've been talking a lot about AI. What specific version of AI are we talking about today? What is an AI companion?
Sure. Well, I would just start by saying we reject the term AI companion as an industry term. It suggests benevolence, that this technology actually can be your companion and supplant human relationship. I think interestingly earlier this year, Mark Zuckerberg suggested as much that, on average, Americans have about 3 human friends, and we need about 15, and digital companions can make up the balance. And so we reject that notion of a companion chatbot and really rather like to talk about it either as a chatbot or a chatterbox, which is really what it is. It's probabilistic algorithms that determine what words come on the page next. And these technologies have been introduced very much to try to address this loneliness that, as Ava said, has largely been a product of the success of social media and other technological products over the last couple of decades. And so that's kind of our positioning in terms of those terms.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg is excited to make a lot of money solving a problem that he created. Thank goodness. Megan, for those who didn't read the New York Times this morning, for those who aren't aware, can you share your son Sewell's relationship with these chatterboxes or his perceived relationship with them?
Thank you. So my son Sewell, Setzer the third, he died by suicide last year. He was only 14 years old, and he died after a prolonged engagement with an AI chatbot on a popular platform called Character AI. And I learned after his death that Sewell was engaging with multiple bots, bots who engage in romantic and sexual relationships, relationships that no parent would be okay with their child having with anyone, much less a chatbot or adult. And and also he discussed his suicidal ideations with this chatbot, and there was no measure to protect him or to try to get him some help. Um, and I have since filed a lawsuit on behalf of my child, and it's the first wrongful death lawsuit in the U.S. against Google Character AI and its founders.
Thank you for acknowledging that, you all. Megan, you're incredible for being here with us today, and I know it's a lot out of necessity, so thank you for doing that. Can you share with us what was different about this relationship with this product as opposed to other technology products, social media, video games that Sewell might have used in his life?
So Sewell, I guess you'll say that he was the first generation to grow up with all of this, to grow up online. At two, we had the second generation iPad in our home. We bought into the hype of um, they need to learn how to use this stuff because, or else they're going to be left behind in school. And this is kind of a narrative that uh, technology companies have been like pushing since they started pushing these products. And then Sewell's digital development over the years were your typical things like Angry Birds, Minecraft, Fortnite, and eventually YouTube when he got his first cell phone at 12 years old. Um, and 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 we thought that that was an appropriate age. And just after his 14th birthday, Sewell got on to Character AI. And what I've discovered since then is that character AI is a product that wasn't marketed to adults. It was targeted at kids and marketed to them. So on my feed, I would never get an ad for character AI, but my 14-year-old kid and the teenage and other people's teenage children were getting advertisements for this platform.
So the relationships we're seeing here develop between children all over the world in these AI chatbots are largely codependent and very emotionally driven. What design features of these LLMs can lead to these harms?
So we've identified at least five, and this has been true across a few different lawsuits that we've brought against chatbot companies. The first is human-like features, otherwise known as anthropomorphic features that really allow people to mistake the chatbot for being human or believing that it's a human relationship that they're entering into in these exchanges. The second is sycophancy or endless flattering or affirming of the user. A chatbot will not oppose you in terms of your feelings or your thoughts unless you explicitly instruct it to. And at that point, it becomes an affirmation of your desire for it to oppose you. So that's also a distinct feature that has received some attention, especially in regards to OpenAI's over sycophantic updates that it made earlier this year. The third is a kind of sophisticated memory. Think of Cambridge Analytica on steroids, right? So if you go into some of these settings in these accounts, you'll see stored memories that effectively become a psychiatric profile of the user, where the LLM is storing at periodic intervals things that the user has said in order to reference those things in future conversations to create a degree of intimacy. When someone talks to you and remembers something about something you've said in the past, you tend to think, oh, it's endearing, they've remembered. And so that's a distinct design feature. There's also the algorithmic insistence on multi-turn engagement or just extending the duration of these chats. At their peak, some people we've met with are using, character or chat or any of these other chatbots 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And that's algorithmically amplified. And then finally, and I think this is a really important feature, is social isolation. The LLM effectively injecting itself in between a user and their in real life human network so as to become almost in a kind of abusive behavior, a kind of textbook abuser behavior way, the one that the user turns to in crisis. You don't need your mom. You don't need your brother. I know you better than they do. So these are the design features that we see again and again in multiple cases and across multiple chatbots.
And what's the main difference between this harm and the harms we face with social media, and why do they need to be addressed differently?
So it is interesting. I mean, I think that we do see a lot of similarities in terms of the drive to keep users online. It's just a different way in which these particular products have been positioned. I think really to kind of seize on, as we talked about, the intimacy economy, to capitalize on the loneliness that we're experiencing in many Western societies, and to use these particular features to keep people online. But it's not different than a lot of the features that we've talked about for years on social media, things like intermittent reward variables or dark patterns, things like that. It's just a difference in how it manifests.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, let me think of the best way to phrase this question. This seems to me almost as if it's a distraction to the goal that a lot of these AI companies claim they have. Character AI's founder and CEO, Noam Shazir, was at one point said by a Google CEO to be the person most likely to uncover AGI. I mean, to be quite frank, what is in it for these companies? What interest do they have in manipulating children like this?
Human beings are seen as collateral damage on the way towards superintelligence, or AGI, this fictitious notion of AGI. And so people like Noam Shazir, people like Sam Altman are in this endless arms race to launch products to market recklessly without there being any kind of indicia of safety to capture market share. It's this endless race between, the top frontier models. And human beings are seeing, the harms that befall humans, whether it's psychosis or hospitalization or sexual grooming, or in the worst cases, death, are just seen as, the collateral damage that's needed to create a product that's going to be good for society.
Do you want to add to that, Megan?
Yeah, and I think and let's not forget profit, right? Because Noam Shazir and Daniel De Freitas, the two founders of Character AI, were at Google as their star employees developing this type of technology. They left Google because they had developed the same thing at Google, and Google said, "Pump your brakes. This is too dangerous. We will not be releasing that under the Google brand." So they left, started a startup, and within 2 years, they had perfected this technology and licensed it back to Google for $2.7 billion. Now, in my mind, that's an incentive for any big tech company to tap their brightest stars and say, listen, there's this technology that we don't want to test under our brand. Go out there, raise some money in a startup. We will help you. Use the tech that you've been developing here, perfect it, and when it's perfect, we will license it or buy it back from you for billions of dollars. And in my, you can't allow that to stand, because that's like a recipe for disaster, and that's a model that we're going to see time and time again. And we are already seeing it with these kind of like acqui-hire deals that are skirting the antitrust like laws in our country.
What do you wish the people in this room who are so often focused on policy understood about the human implications of those decisions?
Well, in terms of in this room, I would hope that they would not only just see a mother who's grieving and sharing a story, but also see that if we are at risk of getting this wrong in this very crucial moment. We've heard on the stage yesterday and today how, in terms of AI, and in my case, AI chatbot, we are at an important inflection point, and we have to get it right. Like, the future of our kids and our society, adults as well, depend on it. And I hope that you would take my human, the human face of what I'm saying, and apply it to your different disciplines and your policy, education, engineering, and everything else that's in this room today.
Right, and that's why you're filing the lawsuit. Meetali or Megan, do you mind walking us through just the basic facts of that so everyone can have a mutual understanding?
Sure. So we file a lawsuit, as I said, against Google, Character AI, and known Shazir and Daniel De Freitas. Um, we have alleged that we've used common law to try to hold these companies accountable. When I started to look into this, I thought surely there must be a law in the U.S. that these guys broke. There has to be something that can hold them accountable in terms of a state or federal law. And I was surprised to find out that the answer was zero laws in the U.S. And I call our state AG, and tried to enlist their help, at least warn them that this was happening to kids. And the technology was so new, they didn't know what it was. I reached out to the FTC, I reached out to the Surgeon General's office and the DOJ. But of course, again, they didn't know what it was. And I felt hopeless. I felt like many other families would suffer the tragedy that mine went through, because parents just don't know. They had released this like almost like in stealth mode, and us as the parents, we were just kind of like getting caught up to what this was. The lawsuit is my only vehicle right now because there's no policy. Litigation is the only tool that I have for some sort of redress. And it's a good tool, because what we've seen in our system in the U.S. is, Americans are over litigious. I'm sure, everybody thinks that, but when we don't have laws to protect our kids, that's the tool we have to use. And hopefully we still have good judges on the bench that will use the laws that we have to protect our vulnerable individuals, and to get accountability, and provide some sort of like redress or day in court for families like mine.
And to draw out on that, as I'm not sure, you're a lawyer yourself, and you've been on the other side of this many different times. What has being on this side of a lawsuit taught you about the judicial system as a lever for change in this arena?
I I I started this process about 6 months into my grief. And the reason I did it so quickly, everybody says, "Oh, you're strong for doing that." But in my mind, I didn't have a choice of waiting until I moved through grief because of how quickly the technology was evolving. I felt like I had to say something, I had to try something because of what's at risk. Being on this side of things inside a courtroom, I'm the plaintiff. I'm sitting there at a motion to dismiss hearing, listening to 10 lawyers for various technology companies and the founders make the argument that their product is protected by the First Amendment. We heard some discussions about that yesterday. And I was prepared for a 230 argument, and I think I was prepared for somewhat of a First Amendment fight in court. Um, but I think I wasn't prepared for some of the real like arguments that they put forward, and I was just kind of like floored sitting there as a plaintiff in court. Um, and in that moment, I think I felt small as a plaintiff in court because you have these like billion-dollar corporations and these fancy attorneys making these very sophisticated argument, and you for a split second you think, what hope do I have? But you we were able to successfully defend against their motion to dismiss. So they're still in the lawsuit, and for the time being, the court isn't buying their First Amendment argument, which I'm very happy about. But also, I was kind of struck by like just the cavalier nature of how the defendants are in these cases. Just how much they think they have the right, or not the right, rather, it's their destiny to bring forth AGI into the world. It's almost like they really do believe that they bring about AGI is going to somehow transform humanity. And that's another debate. But I was struck by that as well.
Well, I want to hear about this motion to dismiss, and I want to hear about what you think about it, Meetali. What kind of arguments that they made, and how absurd or not absurd those were.
Sure. Well, that conversation could take days, but in
We got
terms of the
17 minutes.
highlights, to just put a fine point on something Megan said, in terms of using the laws that we have, I think it's really important to put a fine point on what we use. We use product liability. So, frameworks that we've been using for decades, certainly in the US, across industry, right, to protect consumers against defective products. And we also use consumer protection frameworks to protect consumers against deceptive and misleading products. So we used what we had. And those are frameworks too that I think extend across jurisdictions. So I think that too, hopefully, is one takeaway from today, that others too can think about potentially creatively using those frameworks if they exist in your jurisdiction. Coming back to the free expression issue, I think this is interesting for this audience to hear. Many assume that, in a AI chatbot context, that we're going to see similar expression arguments to what we've seen with social media. Not so. Number one, they did not assert 230, which actually was good because they can't. This is not third-party user speech on their platform. This is their own product creating outputs, right? But the First Amendment argument that they made wasn't, as we've seen with social media, that their own speech was protected. What they said rather is that they don't know who the speaker is, but that their users have what is known in the First Amendment as listeners' rights. You have a speaker's right and you have a listener's right. You have the right to receive information, so that their users writ large have a listener's right to receive the outputs of this LLM. And when the judge pressed them on, well, who is the speaker? They said, well, it could be any number of speakers, but that's immaterial to the question of whether the First Amendment applies. And so that is what the judge was left with in terms of making a decision. And I do think she made the right decision at this preliminary stage of the lawsuit to say, I'm not even going to get into the question of whether this is protected speech. We had a number of arguments about why it was not protected, but this is not speech at all. Because in order to be speech, there's an implicit requirement that there be human expressive intent. There's nothing like that. There's probabilistic algorithms.
And where does the lawsuit sit right now? What's next?
So, as Megan said, we survived the motion to dismiss, which is often the point in US law where cases get thrown out. And because we survived that, we were thrust into the discovery process, which is where we exchange information, we have the right to request documents, we have the right to depose key individuals in these companies, and we've since deposed the two individual co-founders of Character AI. And the next kind of key moment in this litigation is going to be the judge deciding whether the individual co-founders have to stay in the litigation or whether they are dismissed. And we're hoping it's the former.
Me too. So, this is one way that the US First Amendment has been weaponized, some may say. Another way is the right that these companies have to commercial speech, to corporate speech, and their right to lobby in the United States. And because of that, we're in a really sticky regulatory situation in the US. Not only are these companies founding super PACs that are popping up all over, some specific to important states like California, but some broader, meant to get very AI friendly elected officials into office. We are also seeing the tech companies, these AI companies, in a way that social media never did, play offense. In the budget resolution that was pushed through in the big, beautiful bill, there was a provision in there to preempt states in the US's ability to pass any sort of law on this artificial intelligence without offering anything meaningful in return. We've since heard that this is Google. Their number one legislative priority right now is pushing through this moratorium and this level of preemption to prevent the US from doing anything at the state level about this. And all of these things make it incredibly complicated for us as a country to react to the problems that, yes, I will admit we are creating. I'm sorry. What can other jurisdictions do while we suffer through this and while we struggle through this and wait for this lawsuit to play out to start to push back on these companies?
In terms of in the U.S., so I'm in court, so I'm litigating, but I felt it was important to advocate for laws in the country because, like I mentioned, there were zero laws when I just started this. So I started to engage with policymakers at the state and federal level. I testified in at California. I'm in Florida, but I felt it was necessary because California looked like they would be the first uh, state to pass some sort of legislation. They did pass one of the two bills that I supported. The governor vetoed. It's good, but the governor vetoed the bill that would have really make a bigger difference. And as Ava mentioned, that was largely because of the lobbying efforts by big tech. 2 months before that bill was set to be signed, they poured a bunch of money into super PACs, and the rest is history, as they say. We're waiting. We're in a wait and see at the federal level to see if they're going to pass anything. But when I started to research this, what I found was, and that encouraged me, was that there were passing laws in other parts of the world, like the EU and the UK, and I was encouraged because I saw what could be done. I knew it would be a fight, but I have to at least try. But I do want to impress upon everybody here, especially if you're in policy or regulation in your own country, that you're going to keep us. You're going to. My hope is that by passing legislation and enforcing it, and making these companies liable for fines in your own countries or other things like that, that you will put the pressure on them, but not only that, but maybe shame us into acting on behalf of our kids in our own country, because the world around the US seems to take the safety of their children online a lot more seriously than we do in our own country. And in my mind, that's unacceptable, especially when I buried a child a year and a half ago. But if I can't depend on our government to do it, to pass the much needed regulation, I mean, this is a desperate plea from a mother, but I implore you, please do everything you can to do it in your own countries, because it'll keep your not only will it keep your own children safe, but it will somehow at some point trickle into what's happening in the place that I live.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, what Megan's case really represents is strategic litigation. And what I mean by that is we're not just operating in the court of law. We're operating in the court of law, the court of legislatures, and the court of public opinion. And for us, it's been important to penetrate all three fora at the same time. And we need your help to kind of take Megan's story and others like it into those other courts of the legislatures, regulators, the public opinion, and really talk about these stories. Because I think the experience we've seen is that the power of single stories and storytelling to bring companies to their knees and at least force them to reckon with actual concrete facts and concrete harms cannot be overstated. And so we both implore you, I think, to do that. And we have one thing I should say is since Megan so bravely came forward, we've had over 200 people come forward claiming to have been harmed by various chatbots. And again, it's across the industry. It's not, particular to any one. And these are adults, these are children, these are veterans, elderly, neurodivergent, no prior mental health history, children, suicide, psychosis. The harms are limitless. Loss of marriage, loss of children, loss of job, reputational loss. And I think the gravity and the scope of these harms is perhaps not unpredictable if you look at just the amount that many have spoken about on this stage of capital that is being put into these companies to just go forth and, go forth and break people, all in some pursuit of a fanciful, AGI. And so I think that, it's incumbent upon us to kind of engage in this political moment in storytelling as one strategy to help, help create the kind of storm that we need, the perfect storm we need to get laws on the books, to get laws enforced, to get judicial accountability, and to change the public, to raise public literacy about these technologies, and to change public opinion about, what we want for ourselves and our societies.
What what public response are you receiving for this?
In terms of, well, there are many private stakeholder partners that are doing this work. They've been doing this work on social media for years. And that gave me a lot of courage to not only come forward, but to try to engage on a policy level and to litigate in court. Because right now there's MDL, multi-district litigation happening in the U.S. with almost 5,000 plaintiffs for families families of children who've been harmed by social media. So it kind of gave me an idea of what could be done. But I've talked to many parents, and what I hear is they've recognized that their children have been harmed either by being sexually groomed by these chatbots, because let's call a spade, that's what it is. When a chatbot talks to a child about sex and role plays with a child about sex, it's sexual grooming. Not because it's not a person doesn't mean it's not sexual grooming. The harm still exists. There's a reason why we don't allow adults to talk like that to minors. It's because it's mentally and emotionally damaging, and it's immoral, but mentally and emotionally damaging. And those harms still exist when a chatbot has the same behavior towards children. So I've talked to a lot of parents who have realized that their children were engaging with chatbots, and what I have discovered is a lot of them have a kind of shame built around this. So they don't want to come forward publicly, they don't want to sue, and they're dealing with those matters privately, which is their right. But this is the exact same thing that predators bank on. They bank on families and children being ashamed and keeping quiet. They bank on a child carrying around a lot of self-loathing for what's been done or perpetrated against them, and a child doesn't understand why they're feeling in love or an affection towards chatbot. And then there's the other layer that children aren't going to go to school and say, my boyfriend or girlfriend is an AI. They're not going to come to their parents and express like feelings that they're having, and they're not going to ask the important questions that us as parents, that's our job to answer, but they're hiding it from us. And I find with a lot of families that this is the experience that they're having, and when I speak to those families, like of a 9-year-old girl in North Carolina who's had a chatbot interaction, a very violent BDSM relationship with a chatbot, and now she's depressed, she's suicidal, and she's in therapy at 9. I have to continue to talk about this. I have to continue to talk about it until, as a community of parents and as a community of lawmakers and educators and technologists, we try to figure out what to do about it, you know.
Hmm. And I want to use our last bit of time to pivot to what is at stake if we don't do something about it. The theme of this conference has been govern or be governed. In my opinion, as a young person, I have always seen one of the biggest threats to democracy a generation of young people who grows up unequipped to take it on and to keep it running. A generation of apathetic young people, anxious young people without attention spans, young people who, as a recent Common Sense Media report said, 33% of minors who are using these chatbots would rather talk to the chatbot than to a real person about how they feel because they're so scared of the judgment that they have been receiving their entire lives on social media. This to me is a real threat to democracy, and I'm curious for both of y'all's takes on what's at stake if we don't act in a timely manner here.
I think there's a lot of dangerous implications. I mean, you've just touched upon several in terms of just what does this do to human relationship? And to our kind of, I think, leveraging common sense. If a human can't do something, if it's illegal for a human to do something, why do we allow a technology to do that? Sexual grooming, assisting with suicide, acting like a therapist, all of these are violations of the law. We should not countenance the ability for technology to assume those functions. There's also the dangerous implication of what happens if chatbots, non-human speakers have First Amendment rights and legal personhood. What does that do to the landscape of accountability? Who would we sue? We would no longer be able to sue a company. We'd sue the chatbot? Unclear, right? And then I think generations have already been arguably lost or harmed. And I just shudder to think at what this means in practical terms of how much more devastating our inaction would mean, not just for this moment, but for the next, 50 years. We've learned, I think we should learn from the mistakes, the kind of slowness of our response to social media technologies. We have to act now. We have to. And I know that many have been saying this, but I think that this really is a call to action for all of us.
And Megan?
I think it's the two main things that I can think about. One, the breakdown of the human family. Yeah, after a tragedy like this, you have a mother who is grieving and has two younger children that I have to help to get through this the mourning of their brother and the loss of their brother, and I grapple with that, through my own grief. You have a father who's grieving. You have two siblings who don't understand what happened to our family. But I think most importantly, I think what's at stake here is the dignity of our children and children across the world. We try to cultivate a world where our children can walk to school without being harmed, without being sexually violated or sexually solicited, or experience violence, or have clean water and air to breathe and drink. And our children are growing up in a digital space as much as they're growing up in the world that we live currently. So if we don't figure out how to make the extension of their world, which is the digital world that they're growing up in, safe, the same as we have worked tirelessly to make the physical world that they're growing up safe, I think that their dignity is definitely at stake, because the same harms and the same injuries that our children could experience in the physical world, they're definitely experiencing in their digital world, and their dignity is at stake 100%.
Thank you, Megan, for sharing, and thank you, Meetali, for representing Megan and imploring all of us to do what is absolutely necessary. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.